Kris Sims, thank you so much for joining me today, taking a bit of your time out of your day for us to talk about taxpayers and, well, who's sticking up for the taxpayers, Kris? Who's out there doing that? Well, that's you guys. Explain. Tell me about it.
For sure. So, love your show. Franco speaks very highly of you. So, thank you so much for letting me in the door. It was funny. I said, how do I get in contact with him? He's like, just DM him. He's totally fine. So, thank you for being totally fine.
Absolutely.
So, Taxpayers Federation, for folks who don't know about it, we were started back in 1990. So, like before Franco was born, I think. And it was before the internet was a thing. So, we were started back in 1990. It was basically a merger of two ratepayer groups from Alberta and Saskatchewan. They were mad as hell about something called the GST that was being imposed on Canada. So, people were super ticked off with the big sales tax, and people finally got together and they were mad as hell and they weren't going to take it anymore. Bingo bango. We got an entire federation going, and we've been going strong since then. So we do things that are visible, like we hand out the Teddy Waste Awards. You can probably see that golden pig statue above my head on the shelf there.
I can.
Yeah. So that's the Teddy Waste Awards. It's kind of like Doge before there was Doge. And we have a big awards ceremony. We wear tuxes and gowns, and we hand out these golden pig statues to politicians and bureaucrats that blow your money. So
how do I get an invite for one of those?
It's pretty good. And we hold it live at an event in Calgary. We usually do it at a pub, and it gets pretty rip-roaring. It's pretty fun.
Oh, you got to contact. I'm coming next time. I'm definitely coming.
I got Franco to eat a cricket, like a real cricket. It was awesome. I put ketchup on it because I'm a nice person. But so Taxpayers does zany stunts like that to grab attention about wasteful spending by government. But we also do the real deal stuff. Like we'll throw in on a Supreme Court challenge and be one of the interveners because we have lawyers on staff. So we can go everywhere from me being, dressed up with a friend in a chicken suit, protesting in front of a, politician's office, all the way to somebody in full robes going to the Supreme Court. So Taxpayers Federation, our fundamentals are lower taxes, less waste, and accountable government. And so we fight big stuff like the carbon tax. I'm fighting to get the CBC defunded because it is wrong for journalists to be paid by the government, and the CBC is a terrible waste of money. We're opposing the gun
and
grab.
the subsidies of all the other news organizations.
Yep.
Nickel. We're competing with them, and we're us podcasters, and we're kicking we're winning. Let's just say, and that's it. Like, this is the new media. They should be competing with us fairly.
Yeah, and you know why I think that new media is winning is because a lot of people know that mainstream or legacy or whatever term you want to use. Where I worked for years, like off and on, like most of 20 years, I was at CTV and Sun News Network, major mainstream journalism. One of the reasons I think that this side is winning and the legacy is not is because they're on the payroll. When people find out about that, they rightly are outraged because that is a terrible conflict of interest. I don't care if you're left wing or right wing in your little heart as a journalist. You do not take pay from the government. You are propaganda if you are getting paid by the government. You are not being a real journalist. So I think that's why people are losing trust in a massive way in mainstream media, which is truly upsetting because I think back in the day they did a pretty decent job, but it's mostly gone now as far as that trust goes. And what's sad is there's still some decent people working in those trenches. There's still some decent people working in those newsrooms, but once you lose trust of an audience,
but less and less all the time. I mean, look at the Anita Kays and the Jasmine Lanes of the world. I mean, Jasmine Lane, she's an amazing podcaster now, and she's doing fantastic independently, but they're chasing people out of the there's this boys club in there, and if you're not a member of the club and you don't toe the line specifically exactly like they want, you're out. You're on the outside. Either you get fired, or you get blackballed, or you just put in a situation where you just end up quitting because you're so frustrated with it. This is how it's been going, and I think the independent stuff is just doing hand over fist, just killing it.
Great. It's great. Trish Wood talks about this quite a bit. She's a great independent journalist, and she was with Fifth Estate way back in the day. Serious investigative journalist. I listen to her all the time. You'd really like her. And she's a little bit older than me, knows the score. And she often says things like the nature of journalism, mainstream journalism, has changed. Back in the day when she was first starting, and frankly, when I was first starting, it was more of a tradesmanly type thing.
Yeah,
Like, you could
yeah.
finish high school. I went to trade school for journalism, and then you have to be a naturally curious, kind of nosy person that keeps details, right? That's tough to teach that in a 4-year degree in journalism. It's become very paper oriented, and she argues that it's kind of streamlined the type of person that is now in newsrooms, by and large, not to a rule. And she points out that
Schmarmy. I think schmarmy is the word that comes to
it
mind.
becomes a problem, right? And so I really
Yeah.
do hope that with all the new media and independent media, that it can be kind of a phoenix of journalism rising out of the ashes and a rebirth. I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I love seeing the way it's going, but
Me
I would
too.
love to see. I would like to see, you know, traditional media compete in a real way, because you never know where it could evolve into. I mean, the government's creating all these, not only the incentive by paying them, but also legislation that's supposed to give them a leg up. You know, C11, which is supposed to give them a leg up in the algorithm, and then C18, which was supposed to give them a leg up on social. That didn't work out. That
No.
kind of blew up right in their face. And this is actually a perfect segue into this, because that's a levy. It's a levy on social media companies. And what's a levy? A levy is a tax. So it was basically this news tax. Like,
Mhm.
how does that work? Because it's different than most kinds of taxes. How is it that they collect that, and how is it that it's supposed to be doled out?
That's a great question. So we call it the link tax, or like the online news tax. And
Okay.
so I'll tell you what happened before, because everything starts with good intentions, right? And then it goes to hell fast the moment the government gets involved. So it goes something like this. Kind of the old school print guys and gals from the original newspapers were like, hey, online outlets are eating our lunch. We're tired of slaving away under our bylines and doing all of our W5 work and not actually getting paid for it. Now, I may wade into this for a second. The problem
Mhm.
is when the internet first started, the publishers of the newspapers figured they could just put everything on the internet for free and nothing bad would happen. That was a very, very poor decision. It was
Oh
so
yeah.
silly, right? And so then way after the entire herd of horses has left the barn, like they're over the hill, they're like, "Hey," it looked like something from Monty Python. And then they
But
tried to shut.
paywalls like the new way that they try to do it, and it doesn't
Yeah.
help them either. It just chases people out. People are copy and pasting and going into like archive.com
Yep.
and then just pulling up the articles anyway.
Exactly. And
And
so
usually they're just copy and pasted into other people's articles as well, because
true.
National Post will come out with an article, and then you go to every other outlet and they're just quoting the National Post article. So there's like
But
one journalist and a bunch of people doing copy, right?
that's a major issue too. I'll get to the decimation actually of the newsrooms in a sec.
Oh,
But
okay.
what happened was, and it was so frustrating, where these print guys came forward. They're like, "Hey, we want some ability to gain revenue from whenever our articles are posted on like Facebook or whatever
Mhm.
other social media." Now,
Right.
if you don't think about it for
That's a backwards way of looking at it,
totally.
though.
If you don't think about it, it sounds like a good idea, but it really is not, because that is like taxing the paper boy for delivering your newspaper. It's the dumbest
Yeah,
thing ever. You should be
and
tipping the paper boy for
and
delivering your
if
newspaper.
the paper boy was like getting was paying to deliver the
Like,
papers,
this
this
is
is
it.
the, because social
He's
media,
buying his
like,
own bike. Yeah,
he's buying his own bike, yeah, and he's doing all this stuff pro bono just because he feels good about it. Now,
exactly.
this is the funny thing, because I'm in the social media world, so I
Mhm.
do YouTube. I try to promote my stuff on X. I go, and X is where all the news articles go
I love it. X is awesome.
to exactly. And but the thing is, that is, if you have an organic following, that is the most sought after thing in the world right now. Is the
Mhm.
most sought after thing in the world, because most publishers are paying big bucks to get those newspapers in front of other eyes, more eyes. And if you're then turning around to the social media company and saying, every time link shows up, you have to pay the person who has the link. Well, like someone who comes from my background in social media, just knowing how it works, the immediate repercussion is, oh, well, we'll just not allow the links then,
Yep.
because like we're doing you a favor by allowing it.
Yep.
For all intents and purposes. Actually, Facebook, Twitter, all of these different platforms, they would have an incentive not to allow links just generally because it's taking you off of their platform. And yet
Mhm.
they still allowed news links. This was something that was amazing. Like if I go on Facebook and I put a YouTube channel link, it's gone. It's not even, nobody's
No,
gonna
no,
see
it's
it.
like it doesn't exist. Yeah.
Exactly. And same thing with X. Like you got to be sneaky and you got to be like, oh, check out my content somehow. And if you're not successful at that, it's not happening. But the news got this exemption from that for the longest time. And what's their response? Well, I guess it wasn't the news that did this. It was the government that did it. The
So
government screwed over this relationship that was such a good one for a long time.
yeah, the problem is that, as far as I understand, the news guys went to the government. And they went to the government for
Oh, okay.
help, which is a very bad idea most of the time. And so the government told Facebook, hey, Mark Zuckerberg, we want you to hand over a link tax every single time that somebody posts something from the National Post or Global. And Facebook said, how about no? We'll just
Yeah.
ban links, fake news links. So now if you're on this side of the border, if you're in Canada, that is why you can no longer see news links on Facebook. It is because Facebook told the government to go fly a kite and to take their link tax and to shove it. So that's why we're sitting there just deaf and dumb on Facebook, not knowing what's going on as far as news stuff goes. Now, this
What
is
I
the
find
kicker. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
This was the kicker. For the rake off they were getting from Google, Google kind of caved. They did sign a deal. I don't know how much they're actually getting because it is technically private information in some way. So
100
Google
million.
did cave.
That's it. It was published 100
Okay,
million.
okay, great, wonderful. I was chasing that rabbit for a while, and then I had to go back to carbon tax. So the CBC gets a chunk of that money. So that is just crazy because
Wow.
the whole reason why the print guys first got upset was because the CBC was eating their lunch. The CBC never had a mandate to do online print. It was for broadcasting. That was for
Right.
broadcasting. And the print guys were like, what is going on here? Why are you printing everything on your little CBC website? And now it turns out the CBC is taking a chunk of the online link tax money on top of taking $1.4 billion from Canadians, from taxpayers every year. It's
Oh,
wild.
that's nuts. I
I know.
remember as they were trying to pass it, because you're saying that the industry was telling them, no, we're just going to ban the links.
Mhm.
Now, Pablo Rodriguez, he was on CTV and he was already counting his chickens. They hadn't even hatched yet.
Yep.
And he was talking about, $300 million worth of revenue that was going to come in, and it went to zero
Yeah.
really fast, like
Yeah.
really overnight. And this is the nature of the beast. I think this is actually a really good illustration of how governments don't know how business works. Right? Because even if they're told by the people in the business, they're writing this regulation and they have zero clue how it's gonna affect anything.
Governments generally are bad at doing things. Just straight up. They are. I think it was Milton Friedman who said famously that if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert, within 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand. Like,
Yeah.
it's just so true. My dad used to say you couldn't organize a 2-car parade. So, unfortunately, the government is just very bad at doing things. This is one of the reasons why, philosophically, the Taxpayers Federation jumps in. So when the government comes up with this grand plan of, we're going to have a federal school lunch program and we're going to control kids' school lunches from Ottawa. Like, that is a terrible idea. Don't do that. That is the worst thing you could possibly do. Because you know what? Number one, people on the ground know when kids aren't getting fed at school, and people take care of it. Okay. The parents have got this. The secretary ladies have got this. That little front desk at the office is full of apples and milk and juice and sandwiches. Okay. We're good. We're good. We don't need this controlled from Ottawa. And two, you know that they're just going to contract it out to some terrible supplier and spend 6 times as much as they should. And the food's going to be terrible. Like, government solutions to everyday human problems are usually awful. And this link tax is a perfect example.
So tell me, why is it that happens? Why is it that, the government, when they come in, it's always more expensive. A bag of washers for a project, was famous. A bag of washers.
Yep.
Each washer is worth $50. Where you
Yep.
go to the hardware store and each washer is worth 25 cents.
Right.
How is it that becomes a thing?
Great question. So I would give 3 different answers to that. Philosophically, as Dr. Jordan Peterson has pointed out, an individual's life is extremely complicated. Like, think about your interpersonal relationships, how you go to work, your habits. like your hobbies, whatever sport you're covering, whatever it is, right? Your birth order is your family. Like an individual is so complex that it's difficult for them to have their own life completely together as they want. Now
Mhm.
imagine that at scale. Imagine trying as a government, a centralized force, to organize all of these human beings and meet their every need in all of their complex lives. It's impossible. Like, you can't do that. So that's the philosophical answer. Two, there's the practical answer of government gets in its own way because of ongoing pasted over regulations. It's like when you've never stripped down your wall down to the studs and just redone something, and you just keep on trying to paint over the same yucky wallpaper over and over. It starts eventually being terrible. I'll give you an example. You've probably heard of the term March Madness when it comes to government spending.
Well, isn't it March Madness? That's like sale
Yes,
thing.
but in government, it's the worst. So this
Oh,
is
I know. I think I know where you're going with this.
yeah,
When the budget's about to be up and then they have to spend the whole budget,
bingo.
or
Use it
else the
or lose
budget
it.
will get cut. Yeah. I've
It
heard stories of like totally fine office chairs just getting thrown out
Yep.
and then buying a whole new fleet of office chairs.
Mhm.
Things like that, where it's just frivolous, like spending for the sake of spending only.
Now
How true
imagine
is it?
that.
How true is it though?
Totally true. I've worked in there. I've seen that email come through to the department. Okay. So
Mhm.
for a time, I was a staffer back and forth. I've gone back and forth between journalism. It was mostly journalism. And I did a few tours of duty as a staffer in government. I've seen the email, literally. It comes through. And around late January, early February ish is when they're saying, okay, this is how much money we have left in the department budget and how much we need to spend. It is horrendous. Now, picture that at every level of government, in every department for years. Like
That's a lot of money.
the waste is in the billions of dollars. But see, that's so much money and it's so vague that it's not really it doesn't stick out. Like, it's not as sexy, to use a term. So there's those two reasons. It's philosophical, it's practical, and then there's just the entitlement. You get to the point, if you're in government for too long, some people just throw out the taxpayer credit card and don't care. I don't know if you saw in BC, in British Columbia, there where you're at, the BC government, I forget which department it was, went on some trip and they spent $57 per sandwich for lunch.
And they just don't care.
They don't care. Like, I actually have trouble because I make my kids food and stuff. I cook.
Yeah.
How do you make a sandwich that costs $57? Like, is that lobster with like goose pate and like saffron on it? Like, did a unicorn deliver it? Like, so it's for those three reasons. It's entitlement and structural problem and philosophical problems. That's why government's terrible at most things.
Well, what about what we've been seeing a lot of in the news in the past while? We're not even hearing about it much anymore. I don't know why. No political parties even talking about it, but the waste, fraud, and abuse, like all of this stuff that we've been seeing with the Arrive Can scam.
Yep.
So that really opened up the door when that news came out that it was an app that should have cost what $100,000 and a couple of students could have done it. As one young guy, he did it on a weekend.
Yes.
He actually reproduced the thing for no cost. But yet somehow it cost us, it ended up ballooning into like 60 some odd $1 million.
Correct.
And it was a handful of these contractors who were like, they're Ottawa insiders. They don't actually do any of the work. They're just contracting it to other people. Why can't the government contract it to the people in the first place? Why is there, what's going on with that? Like it's a ton of waste, fraud, and abuse, and it doesn't stop there. It goes all the way to the green slush scam and this rocket company that's supposed to bring us internet when we could just go with Elon Musk, but they've got Musk derangement syndrome. But
yes, big time.
How does this all become a thing, and where does it all originate?
So two ways I would say that becomes a thing. It becomes a thing because Ottawa is kind of like a terrarium, right? You've got all these creatures living in there, but it's a controlled environment. And like, if you're in Ottawa, once you go past, Bank Street, right, or a little bit further, like once you hit, the edge of like, Le Breton Flats or something, you're done. But if you stay within that little terrarium, it is full of staffers, people who work for the politicians themselves, of government bureaucrats who staff up the departments. They're also known as permanent government. They just work there and live there all the time. And lobbyists. So you have lobby firms everywhere. And basically, a lobbyist's job is to get in with their friends and their former friends who might have been in government at some point, or they might have worked in the bureaucracy somehow, maybe journalism. Okay. That's becoming more popular now. And you start working, I'm going to use an old term here. You work your Rolodex, you work your contact file. And so then, so-and-so, you were at his wedding a few years ago, and he now works at, the Department of National Defense. Well, lo and behold, look at you working at a lobby firm that is a defense contractor. That's how that gets going. And then once you just make that part of the permanent ecosystem of that terrarium, like it just continues on its own. You don't even need to add to it. You've probably seen pictures of a plant that's been growing in a ginormous wine vat for 50 years, and it's got its own thing. Yeah, it's like that. Ottawa is like that. So in order to cut that down, you got to grab the machete. You got to really start slashing government waste in government departments. So that's why that gets that bad, combined with lack of oversight. So if they don't have a deep dive auditor general with like a team of Rottweilers ready to go after some of these contracts and hold these people to account, like when they're called in front of committee and they must be compelled to answer. And if they're screwing up so bad that it's fraud, they should face charges. So this is one of our elements at the Taxpayers Federation is accountable government. So it's a lack of oversight and a lot of cronyism.
So a lot of people say, we got to get rid of lobbyists, but then I turn around and I say, well, but then we would lose the Taxpayers Federation.
We're you guys not a lobby group. Yeah.
You're not a lobby group.
No. We are
so what's the difference? How does this work?
Great question. So it's advocacy. You know what I mean? So for example, we will understand from our supporters who support us, like we've got like hundreds of thousands of supporters across Canada, and we send out emails to them, and we'll hear from them saying things like, our heating bill is way too high. Look at this carbon tax on my heating bill. And so then we will muster up a posse, get people to sign a petition against a carbon tax, and then mass email the minister responsible or mass email the leader of the opposition and say, what are you doing about this problem? So it's advocacy. There is a difference for sure. Yeah, we're not a lobby group.
Oh, fair enough. So, like, is there validity to people saying we should get rid of lobbying? Because I think is there not like a good side to lobbying?
Sure. And that would see, now you're getting into like some issues of free expression and freedom of association. I don't really know if you would be able to outlaw, because what are you going to say? You can't get together with people who are your colleagues and former colleagues and push for a reason, push for a contract or for the right person to get it. Like, then you're getting into some murky territory. What I do find interesting from a practical sense is how much politicians choose to listen to lobbyists. So I think that's the fairer way to go about it, is to really scrutinize how often the politicians are listening to lobbyists and which ones, instead of going after the lobbyists themselves. Because again, they should be able to freely associate with people, right? And to speak their mind, express themselves. Those things do matter. So maybe it would be smarter to really analyze which politicians are holding the lobbyists to account. I don't know if you saw that article. It was out probably 6 months ago, and Pierre Poilievre wrote it for the National Post. And it was quite surprising, and it sent a ripple through the advocacy community, as to put it nicely. And he basically said, I'm done listening to lobbyists. I'm tired of people who want to get lunch. I'm tired of people who want to have a picture with me for just some meeting where they're not truly advocating for something important. And that was pretty interesting. I'll give you an example. The oil and gas sector, amazing people working in it, like outstanding people. I live here in Alberta, absolutely love them. But man, oh man, some of their big mucky muck lobbyists don't help themselves. They're the ones that sign on to so many of these treaties and say that we need to get down to this and we need to support a carbon tax. We've had to fight with them before, with us saying, scrap the carbon tax. Like, it's wild that you need to explain this to an oil and gas company. But
we just saw BP. So British Petroleum just turned around and they got rid of all their DEI and green project stuff that they were doing. Is that like the lobby side of that? Like, because obviously British Petroleum, not a lot to do with Britain anymore, but a lot to do with petroleum, and that's their business. But they had like ESG stuff that they were doing. It looks like they just dropped it.
Oh, so I'm a neophyte at this. I'm not very good at this, but there are a few people that are really into this. So I'm tepidly putting my toe in the water.
Okay.
Apparently, there are elements within these companies where, in order to do banking business or something, in order to function, to keep money flowing, they must have those DEI elements apparently tied into what they're doing. And apparently this is where I know about it. It was through this channel. It wasn't through DEI because that's not our issue. It was through kind of carbon tax sort of stuff. Like they had to agree to certain emissions language, certain green language in order to keep the lights on, which I was way over my head, but somebody smarter than me explained it to me who works in the industry. So maybe they're kind of uncoupling themselves from that requirement. That's kind of what that sounds like, where they're backing away from some of those more social agreements and they're focusing more on work.
Well, I think Donald Trump and what's happening down south and what's happening in Argentina is a good step in the right direction, right? Because well, we can get into the tariffs in a minute.
I was going to say, you said the T word.
It's a step in the right direction because we're scrapping the all of this garbage. It's a bunch of garbage. It's a bunch of socialist garbage at the end of the day is what it is. And it has an agenda. James Dullingpool is the best at pointing this one out. They're watermelons. They're green on the outside. We crack them open and they're commie red inside. And that's it's a great analogy for this stuff. And it's all coming out of Europe. And I'm glad to see that in North America, at least, starting with the United States, it's turning around, and that stuff is going to feed right back into Canada. And
really quick, the problem is that quite often that isn't just the company that's doing it, because if a company wants to waste its own private money, that's up to their shareholders, I guess. But when the government starts blowing taxpayers' money on this nonsense is when it really gets infuriating. You probably saw some of our work a few months ago where we were going through global affairs, which is very similar to what they're dealing with in the States. It's on a smaller scale because we're Canadian. We're not as big as the United States, but they were blowing money on crazy stuff, like doing an entire study on asking, is space travel sexist? Right?
Yeah, it's really ridiculous.
Totally dumb. Spending thousands of dollars on a lesbian pirate musical. It's supposed to follow the story of these two women who cross-dress as male pirates and then find themselves on the boat and whatever. Hey, if you want to do that and watch that, fill your peg leg. Go for it. Don't force your neighbor to pay for it. It's just nonsense. It's in the same way that we were opposed to giving taxpayers money to the Edmonton Oilers NHL team. Yeah. Why do they need taxpayers' money? If that's
they make enough money.
It's crazy. If that's your form of entertainment, go pay for it yourself. Do not come crawling to the government for corporate welfare. And we don't care if it's got a special flag on it or not. If it's a waste of money, it's a waste of money. So that's
for example, I'm not a hockey guy. I've never been really a sports person. And Marty had to explain to me what the elbows up thing meant.
Really?
I didn't even know. It's not my thing, right? So
if somebody you drop the gloves and you pull the sweater over the guy's head. No,
I know that. Okay. Everyone knows that. Yeah.
Elbows up is a little bit around there. So I grew up watching the Oilers, and I still don't think they should get taxpayers' money. So
yeah, I'm a car guy. That's my thing. So yeah, no, I absolutely don't. I don't think that they should get taxpayers' money. Just like as a car guy, I don't think Chrysler should have got a bailout or GM shouldn't have got a bailout. None of this stuff. I mean, really, at the end of the day, what is that? It's you're you have the private equity, private firms that make money in the private market in the private sector, but then you socialize the losses. It's ridiculous. No, if companies fail, they should fail.
Yes.
And that's a fundamental important thing in markets, is that when players fail, then their capital goes up in the equitable market. And you have, for liquidation, massive reduction in rates on capital, and you get new entrepreneurs coming in, and it's great because then you get more players. Instead, what do we do? We have this idea that Murray Rothbard actually incidentally talked a lot about. I know you're a big fan of the Mises school, the Austrian economics.
Because I listen to Franco all day, every day. Yes.
Yeah. But Murray Rothbard, he had this idea, this concept that monopolies they only can exist with the government propping them up. Without the monopoly being propped up by the government, other people will come in and just underbid them and come in and compete, and things will be great. So they'll do things like add regulation to the marketplace, make the barrier to entry so high that you just can't get in there. And we have tons of this stuff in Canada.
Oh yeah.
It's unbelievable. Like,
Yeah.
I've been learning so much about the dairy lobby. It's nuts. It's nuts. And finding out that they're capable of making and breaking politicians is just absurd. With
Well,
this idea of supply management. It's crazy.
we were talking earlier before the show, I don't hope you don't mind, but Atlas Shrugged. And there's that great moment where there's this upstart, really fast railroad called the Phoenix Durango. And it's the one supplying the oil that was booming out of Colorado, again, by an industrialist who was working on himself without government help. And what the bad guy within Taggart Transcontinental, which was the dominant railroad and the legacy railroad, did was he went to government. And he got them to pass a whole bunch of laws and regulations, and they ironically called it the anti-dog eat dog rule. It's awful. And they
it's Orwellian, yeah.
Totally. And they put the Phoenix Durango out of business. Well, I think Ayn Rand had the curse of Cassandra because she was able to foresee a lot of the things that are going on now. Things were still bad, obviously. She survived in quite a time of history, and she fled to the United States. So she saw enough herself. But I do think that she saw a lot into the future. And to your point, what this is basically corporate welfare. It is corporate welfare. And for some folks who are like, that's mean to use the term welfare, it was
I don't think so.
Okay, well, it was actually Stephen Lewis, who's a left-wing socialist guy, who said corporate welfare is bad. We agree. Corporate welfare is bad. Taxpayers' money shouldn't be going to corporations. Governments shouldn't be playing investment banker with taxpayers' money. The companies should sink or swim on their own.
Well, let me ask you this, because so I've been advocating for this, that well, for one, if we wanted a battery plant to come to Ontario, the best way to get that battery plant to come to Ontario is entice them with lower taxes instead of a big whopping check from the taxpayer, which we'll never get back. Like, there's no way we're ever going to get that money back. And it turns out they didn't even make the factory, and they've walked away. They've walked away entirely.
So there's a complex mix of just straight up money being handed to these companies and then tax credits. But we get into some murky waters with tax credits, because then you start wondering who's getting the tax credit and why. How big do you have to make your company be? How much production do you have to have? Like, that's when it gets funny. At the Taxpayers Federation, we just want them to lower the taxes, period.
Period. Like, everyone can get the lower taxes and benefit
exactly.
from it.
And that way they're not picking and choosing and playing politics. Of course, just leading up to an election is when it happens most. I like to say, quit giving me beef jerky, give me the whole cow. So reduce the tax rate altogether, and that's a smart way to do it. And, spoiler alert, there has to be demand for a product. People have to want to buy it. You cannot government mandate people to like to buy something. That's not how this works. And this is what we're running into. Also, I will point out the problem. I sat up at night once and I did the math, because I asked myself, okay, let's just say for a second that all of our vehicles that we own, our cars and trucks, are private vehicles, not counting fleet or anything else, privately owned vehicles. Let's say Santa turned them into electric vehicles overnight for free. Okay. How much energy would they require? So all the ones that are owned now, 13 new CANDO reactors. Yeah. Those massive ones, like the Darlington big whoppers, not the little ones they're talking about making, 13 of them. Those things cost so much money, and they take over 10 years to build, and we're not building them. So
when you need the transmission lines that can carry that capacity, you need transfer stations that can carry the load. Yep. You need, and it's all the infrastructure across the board. It's not just where you produce it. It's how you get it to the consumer. None of that exists. And you can't just make that overnight.
No. And the government has done guesstimates, and it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars with the B. Ridiculous. It's wild. And so this is where we're kind of scratching our heads again, going back to government being bad at everything. Why would they just throw in an electric vehicle mandate and say by the year 2035, it will be illegal for you to purchase a vehicle of your choice? You must purchase one, the government says, and they've got no plan. It's one thing for, it's one thing for the utopians to say, you must eat this or you must drive that. But at least in the books, they've got big plans. They construct these realities. The government doesn't bother. They just put through kind of rules here and there to help their friends, and then they just leave the rest, and we all suffer because of it.
But it reminds me of a speech that Obama did where he, Jeffrey Tucker wrote about this. He's a great writer for the Misuse Institute. And he took credit for the government for automatically defrosting refrigerators and freezers. It's such a strange thing to take credit for.
That's so weird.
But he took credit for that in one of his speeches. And it was this like, this is the miracle of government operating and how we can influence the marketplace. And then Jeffrey Tucker did a whole expose on it saying, no, it took about 40 or 50 years, but the free market was making this happen on its own. And somehow Obama comes in and just takes credit for it. It's outrageous.
Wasn't it the Kelvinator model that was first frost free? I think it was for the fridge.
I'm not
I
sure.
like old kitchens.
Oh, okay, but yeah, like so automatic defrosting.
Yeah.
You remember they used to have like
the ice box.
Yeah, it would get smaller and smaller and smaller.
I used to have one of those in my apartment in the Glebe in Ottawa. Yes, they were awful.
Yeah. But
no, I think it was Kelvinator. Yeah, for automatic frost-free fridges. And Obama claimed it was the government that invented
it because they mandated it, and they claimed that the mandate is what caused the companies to go down this path when it was clearly not that way. And the government would never have known about automatically defrosting refrigerators if the market hadn't produced them in the first place. The government's not coming up with these ideas. It's the other way around. But it's this backward sort of thinking that governments tend to have. And so a hubris, right?
Yes.
Like, we're going to make the things do the thing.
Occur.
I mean, yeah, like why would the government have an idea about launching rockets into space and then having internet that's accessible from satellites that fly overhead if somebody hadn't already done it, right?
And maybe just pay that person and save Betty a ton of money and hassle. It's the same thinking with the carbon tax. It's exactly the same thinking with the carbon tax. And frankly, there were economists that would be described, or at least describe themselves as being on the right back in the day. In 2008, it was the coolest thing ever to dabble with carbon taxes. And at the time, the BC BC Liberal Premier Gordon Campbell was hanging out with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Don't know if people remember that. When he was the governor of California, and they were planning carbon taxes. It was the coolest thing. Back then, they called it the price on carbon. And the thinking went something like this, basically of what you just said. If we force it, they will come. There will be an automatic, demand and supply for this thing. But that's not how it works. Because again, getting back to human beings, we're complex individuals, right? You can't just force everybody into one direction. It just doesn't work out. And so the real numbers that happened with the carbon tax are brutal. So they started it in 2008 in British Columbia. It was used as a template. Trudeau used it as a template. He flew out to BC. He saw the $2 price of gas and he went, that's awesome. I'm going to make that happen in all of Canada. And so he used BC as the carbon tax template. In 2008, they said many things. They said it was going to be revenue neutral. They said it was going to stop at $30 a ton. They said it was going to create a plethora of affordable alternative energies that you could just switch to. And this is key. They said it was going to make emissions go down. They said that the carbon tax in BC would make emissions go down from 2007 levels by 33% by the year 2020. Instead, emissions went up.
Oh, no.
Just missed that target by a mile. Like, you're not even in the range, man. You're not even hitting outside of it. It was
But
wild.
the reality, like with the actual technology, we're getting cleaner. We're getting cleaner all the time. So, I mean, I work in auto mechanics. I fix cars. And
Nice.
I remember in the 1990s going into the shop. I wouldn't like to go back to the 1990s when, cars were coming in and they stunk. And there was extra hydrocarbons coming out, and it was like noxious gases coming out of cars. These days are quite clean. Like, you drive a car into the shop, you barely notice that it, you'd had driven a car into a shop. You know what I mean? You're not
So
smelling
you're more
it.
of a computer car guy, not like, an old Fast and Furious, like 1970s.
Oh, I love those old cars. I love those old cars.
Nice.
But would I like trust one to get me from A to B in the middle of January? No. I'm gonna get in my modern car because it's good. It's reliable. It'll work reliably every time. So yeah, I mean, there's the nostalgia and the love for that stuff. But then, there's the reality of, hey, let's make these things way more efficient.
Sure.
And in fact, this is a great story. So the Volkswagen was, is one of the big manufacturers, and they're from Europe. They're really
Yeah.
clean and they're
German engineering.
yeah,
Yeah.
skook 'em, right? So they had a mandate on diesels to get rid of, nitrous oxides and hydrocarbons, all these gases in their diesels. But when you start trying to get rid of the nitrous oxides in diesels, I'm not going to bore you with all the technical stuff out of it, but when you try to get rid of that, you end up cutting a lot of the power and efficiency. And your hydrocarbons go way up because you're not fully burning the fuel.
Yeah.
And so to hit the emissions levels that they were looking at, it was really difficult to make it a savory car, because the more efficient it is and the better on fuel it is, typically the more power you get out of it too. And they're zippy and they're great. And we're, talking about these TDI diesel cars, they came out. So to work their way around it, a clever computer programmer figured out that, hey, when we can't get these things to pass, but yet still be powerful, as soon as we do tune them so that they pass emissions, they suck and they don't drive well.
Yes.
But here's what we could do. I know an algorithm that will figure out if the thing's on the dyno and trick the car into detuning so that it knows that it's on the machine that's measuring it, and pass it. And then as soon as you drive off the machine, it goes back to its normal tuning.
Oh, wow. I
So
never knew exactly how they did that. I knew they got in trouble for it, but I didn't know how they did that. That's pretty genius.
People went to prison over this.
Whoa.
Yes. And you don't normally hear that in this white collar crime stuff.
Wow.
People actually went to prison.
Really mad.
Yeah, it was something else. So, but then, so this was driven by the government, and a lot of people in the technical world are looking at it like, wait a second, is it really worth all the hydrocarbons and the inefficiency to just try to nail those nitrous oxides? And then the government mandated some other technology with burning urea in tailpipes, and we don't even know what the effects of burning urea is.
Urea?
It's a type of
Sorry, I know what that is. It's used in foot cream. What?
I
did not know we were going to be talking about this tonight.
I didn't either. I didn't know we were going down this path, but yeah, it's actually it's an ammonia product. Yeah, so it's like pee. And in fact, the engineers are hilarious, because when you have trouble codes, sometimes they add in a funny one. So like if your catalytic converter is not operating right, the code for that is a P420, so bad smoke, right? And then for this system, if it goes bad, it's P2BAD, so P too bad. It's hilarious, right?
I'm so glad that humans are still making these things, because then we have a sense of humor. If Skynet were doing it, it just wouldn't be funny. So
right. So it's called death fluid. Anyway, this is all government mandates on industry, and it causes the industry to have to comply and go down this weird rabbit hole of technology that they otherwise wouldn't have gone down, and we probably would have found things a lot more efficient. In fact, there's a perfectly good example of this happening out of British Columbia, Canada. A small startup called Edison Motors, and they had this great idea that I've been pondering for a while. I said, these Teslas are great, but what about when it's cold? Wouldn't it just make sense to make it a hybrid? Because then electric, really efficient, 3-phase AC electric drive with an engine, an internal combustion engine running at its like top capacity or at its optimum range, and then you would get super high efficiency. This is the direction that the free market actually ends up going anyway, is towards efficiency, right? If the government just let it alone, leave it alone, it would go down this path. Anyway, Edison Motors did try going down the path of getting government grants and assistance, and they hit roadblocks on every step of the way. It's like you can't win for losing. The government's going to spend all this ridiculous money. I think I saw an article the other day, $11 billion under Trudeau's reign for transgender stuff around the world.
Yep. I don't know the exact amount, but yeah, it's the dumbest waste of money ever, no matter where you look at it. The arts grants that they hand out are just mind numbing. Like
It's
even here
insane.
in yeah, it's a huge waste of money. And so we really do need somebody who comes into government that just picks up the chainsaw. And keep in mind also, they've added more than 100,000 bureaucrats to the ranks of the federal government. It's just an astonishing amount. I think the payroll went up by 70% or something crazy. I think Franco was telling me, like, the human beings, there's too many people working at the federal government. And so it's just wasting a ton of money. And then you're right, no matter where you look in whichever department, they're wasting it. And the problem is again, one, they waste it up front. Two, they get into people's grill and change their lives where they shouldn't be interfering with them, kind of like they're doing with the gun grab. And three, they don't think it through. Like I was explaining with the lack of power to be able to charge these vehicles. Like we just don't have the juice to make these vehicles all go the way the government wants us to. And interestingly, I put that to one of the folks I was debating a couple of years ago there on CKNW, because I was going after the carbon tax again, and he was getting very upset and calling me a monster and blah, 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 blah. And I just said, like, where do you think the energy is going to come from to power your little battery-powered vehicles? And he said, actually, not everybody needs to have a private vehicle. We should be living in controlled neighborhoods with electric buses that are run by the government, and they'll come pick you up and take you to your pod. I was like, there it is.
There it is. You know, North Korea is open. Like they could just go up there and check it out for themselves.
I think they accept visitors. I'm not sure. It was gross, man.
That's insane. Holy cow. Why would you want, like, govern me harder, daddy? Like that, like,
you know, I guess some people just weren't disciplined enough as kids, and they need more of it. I don't know what it is. It's weird. I think you should be able to mostly live your life as you want to. Grover Norquist, he's with basically the American version of the Taxpayers Federation, even though we're not affiliated. He worked in the Reagan administration. He said something famously. He said, government should be small enough that you can drown it in the bathtub. Yeah. Wow. It's kind of violent imagery. I like to say drown it in a teacup because then it's nicer. But yeah.
But people would say, like, if you're for the economy, you're against the environment. And, you know, one of my favorite economists, Dr. Walter Block, well, when he was working for the Fraser Institute, incidentally, when he was younger, he worked for them before going off to the Misuse Institute, which he's no longer with, incidentally. But he brought forward a lot of ideas of how it would be actually more beneficial to use the free market and courts and lawsuits to go after bad actors for environmental reasons than it would be to just pass new laws. And in fact, it was eminent domain laws that, you know, ends up allowing a lot of these bad actors to be bad actors in the first place. And if we just got rid of some of the eminent domain stuff, then, you know, if you're polluting my yard,
your private property,
I get to sue you. But instead we don't do that because they're for the greater good. It's for the greater good that power plant or whatever's doing this, and so we just fine them, and it just becomes an externality of the a cost of operation instead of being a real thing. Back when they were bringing the railway across the nation, right? There was lawsuits because farmers' fields were getting covered with soot.
Oh, interesting.
And they were suing. They were suing the tycoons, you know, the robber barons. They were suing them, and they were suing them successfully. And they were saying, you know, clean up your act. Well, these companies, they were working on and developing rudimentary emissions devices for these, you know, coal-fired locomotives at the time. And then the government came in and said, no, you don't have to worry about it. Eminent domain. Nobody can sue you. And all of the emissions went out the window, all of that. So this would have been a natural precursor using the courts and free markets and damages. You should be entitled to damages if somebody damages your property, but we don't go down that path for obvious reasons now, right? It's cronyism.
A lot of exactly. There's cronyism, and then there's a lot of folks who make these regulations who are allergic to the idea of private property, right? They don't want to go even into that realm, right? So they won't meet you on that playing field. You bring up the coal-fired locomotives, which is fascinating. There was a time where I'm sure you've read about it. It was just a little over 100 years ago, where we did have a transportation emissions crisis, to put it nicely. It was horse manure. So the cities of London and New York City, to a smaller extent, were drowning in horse manure. I'm talking just piles of it. There were dead horses in the street, okay? There were
Yeah.
carcasses of dogs. It was disgusting. You want to talk about bad air quality? You want to talk about a polluted, terrible environment? If you go to New York City right now and stand there at Times Square, if you were able to bring somebody to the future from the 1880s, they would be shocked at how clear and blue the sky was. They would, and how clean the street is. You
Oh,
could
it's unbelievable.
It
It's night and
it is
day.
night and day. And guess what? The government did not force the internal combustion engine into being. No, man created that out of innovation because someone saw a market for it and figured out a way to make a horseless carriage so there wasn't manure everywhere. And bingo bango, within like 5 years, that massive crisis, which was a real crisis, was gone. So
That's
it always leads
amazing.
to other things. There's such good examples. I'll give you another one. I love using this one because you mentioned the environment.
Mhm.
And I've got a lot of strong feelings on this. So this is not CTF doctrine. I'm taking off my CTF hat.
Okay.
I grew up, they still like what I say, but it's not our thing. But I grew up on Vancouver Island. Okay.
Mhm.
I swam with the salmon. I watched the super pods go past me. I've hugged trees. I would literally do it again tomorrow if I felt like it. Okay. I am a small E environmentalist. This is from a thrift shop. Everything I'm wearing, I thrift everything because it uses fewer elements. And I can also find cooler stuff because there's more variety.
Well, because you think about the first two R's in the reduce,
That's
reuse,
right.
and then recycle, right?
All the time.
We lost those. We lost those
did.
entirely.
And this is the kicker. There's been so much hyperventilating over whatever emissions target our government decides to agree to on behalf of all of us. And the carbon tax, it's, pardon my metaphor, it's eaten up all the oxygen in the room for small E environmentalism. And so this is where I was so frustrated where, like I pointed out with BC, we're missing our emissions targets all the time. They've never hit their emissions targets. We're headed down the same route federally. The Environment Commissioner came out a few months ago and said, boys and girls, we are missing this target by a mile. It's not going to happen. And there's a reason for that. It's not because Canadians don't care about the environment. It's because largely most of them do not have an affordable alternative energy source that they can switch to. It's not like paper or plastic bags. Okay. They cannot switch it. Okay. If they could, they would have by now. But right now, unfortunately, it doesn't exist at scale. Once that happens, please, Lord, invent the dilithium crystal chamber. That would be awesome. Like truly awesome. And so from an environmental perspective, you get into this frustrating cycle in Canada where even if, God forbid, we shut down everything tomorrow, Canada no longer exists, again, just hypothetically, it wouldn't make a dent in global emissions. So if global emissions are your thing and you're deadly afraid of it and it keeps you up at night, I understand. I'm meeting you where you are here. Even if we cease to exist, it wouldn't make a dent in that because we produce 1.5% of those emissions.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be smarter? Wouldn't it be smarter, instead of punishing people for driving their minivans and heating their homes in winter here in Canada, doing nothing, making them poor, wouldn't it be smarter to tackle the big end of the arithmetic problem? Why don't we sell clean burning natural gas to India? 200 million people there are burning wood, coal, and animal dung every day. Every day. Crazy heavy emissions. Crazy heavy toxins.
No business case, right? Is that what
oh my goodness, this is it. We're back to government. We're back to government just getting in the way of itself. And so this is where I do feel for people who feel that this is an environmental solution, the carbon tax. It's not. I'm really sorry it's not, but it's not. And I think it started in BC because you're living there, it's so beautiful. You can start getting a sense of guilt of like, I get to live here. And so this is my sin tax of, paying through the nose to fill up your car. It doesn't have to be that way. We can do this smarter.
Well, China doesn't. Well, China is one of the biggest players, and when it comes to producing emissions, and China doesn't have much of a concern about all of these things. I think it's largely because they already have a communist government, but
they're already there.
They're already there, but they're trying to industrialize as well. They're trying to get to that point because once you have the affluence, then people start looking around and going, "Wait a second,
bingo!
This place is a dump. I want to clean it up.
Bingo!
I don't want to live in trash."
Exactly. Once you're able to afford the necessities of life, a safe home and a safe neighborhood and a vehicle and healthy food, you can kind of like and start looking around. And then you start caring about the spotted owl. You do. Last little anecdote about back in time in history to today. I was reading an old article in, I think it was Harper's Bazaar. You've probably seen this cartoon because you're definitely in this space. Um, you know what really saved the whale? Oil.
Oh, I tell this story all the time,
It's,
actually.
isn't it
I
great?
love this one.
Have
JD
you?
Rockefeller, the guy that everybody says is the tycoon robber baron. He's the bad guy. He single-handedly, what did he created the middle class, saved the whales, and cleaned up the environment all at the same time. The
It's
tar
amazing.
flats. So all the tar flats for the story.
Yeah.
You want to hit it? You want to hit it because you know
No,
the
no.
story.
The only thing I know about it is this cartoon, this political cartoon. Have you
Oh,
seen it
okay.
where the whales are celebrating and they're at a ball?
No, I haven't seen that.
Okay. I'll send it to you postscript. It's a bunch of whales. They look like, I don't know, humpback whales or gray whales or something. And they're at this
Right.
huge celebration, like cocktails and like they're dressed in gowns and stuff. And it's around 1880, 1890, around there, I'd have to guess. And they're celebrating the discovery of mineral oil. It was amazing because that is what saved them. Because up
Yeah.
until then, in order
It's
to burn
kerosene.
lamp oil was all whale oil. It was astonishing.
Yeah. So it was kerosene. It was kerosene and mineral oils, and it came
Amazing.
from the tar flats. So yeah, there's
I
all
don't
this
know this part
propaganda.
of it.
Yeah. So there's all this propaganda about the tar sands. It gets mixed up with the tar flats. So
Okay.
the tar flats were all over continental United States, all over North America. And this guy, I think it was JD Rockefeller. He was this tycoon guy,
Yeah.
and he wanted to become a millionaire. He wanted to become super rich, and the only way to do that in a market economy is not by like, holding everyone down and keeping them hostage. No, it's by offering them a product that they would like for a reasonable price.
Yep.
And that's exactly what he did, right? So he came up with this idea of turning the pollutant, the tar that was in these tar flats, into a workable, usable product, which replaced whale oil, which was quite expensive.
Yes.
And the average the commoners couldn't use it because they couldn't afford whale oil. There's a process to catch a whale, bring it to shore, render its blubber, all of this stuff that's involved in that. So what they did was he found a way to get poor people to be able to actually stay up past dark.
And then they got to be productive and write books and do stuff and
Read
learn.
and write books and learn. And this was a huge benefit to the middle class or the lower classes, which actually bred the middle class.
There's uplift.
It was amazing. It's an amazing thing. And what are the history books, right? Because the history books are written by filthy communists. The history books call him a villain, a robber baron.
Amazing. Right? I knew that he was the one that was really helping to modernize oil. I didn't realize it was from like tar flats. I thought they were like drilling, like classic oil derricks drilling down for like.
No, they did that later because they cleaned up all the tar flats.
Well, that's what they're doing in the tar sands. That's what they're doing in the oil sands. This is what blows my mind, and I have to explain this to family who don't understand Alberta. It's like no. The oil is already in the sand. It's like the world's biggest oil spill. Okay, they're
not putting it in the sand.
It's there. It's already there. You would have been able to, like, 1,000 years ago, you would have been able to light some creeks on fire type thing because it was naturally leaching. That's where it was. Thank the dinosaurs or whenever it was deposited there. They're cleaning it. They're scooping it up in big trucks. Okay, sorry to be so rudimentary. And they're sifting it and cleaning the thing, and then they're putting the clean sand back.
Literally steam cleaning it with steam.
They're cleaning up an oil spill. And they're powering our continent by doing so. Like it's mind-blowing this isn't understood. Yes.
I wish we had more time. Now, for the viewing audience that's watching this later and not watching it live, on the live broadcast of this, we're gonna go on for more time. So what you guys need to do if you're watching this now and you're like, I'm riveted to this conversation and I want to see more of it. You either have to catch it live or you become a member and you can watch the live streams at your leisure at any chance that you want. Because we're going to go into Q&A. We're going to go talking with the audience, and you could be one of these members of the audience. For all the people that are here live right now, you are members of the audience, and we're going to keep going. But for the sake of the people watching this after the fact, credentials, throw them out there and tell us, where can everybody find you?
Awesome. So it's the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I am the Alberta director. You can always reach me through our website, taxpayer.com. But more important than reaching out to me is that we kind of provide a form of fellowship. So if you want to defund the CBC, if you want to cancel the gun grab, if you want to scrap the carbon tax, whatever it is, we have a petition about that topic on our website. And no, we don't think that if we get a certain number of petition signatures that, Mark Carney is going to change his mind. What this does is it signs you up for that particular issue's tax fighter army. And the next time it's time for us all to mobilize together and send mass emails or go to a rally or do some phone banking, something, you're on the team. And what's really cool, and I won't get sappy about this, but I do read a ton of emails from our supporters. It's tough out there. And a lot of people are starting to feel like they're alone. And I don't want them to feel like they're alone. And so you'll get our updates and our emails, and it gives you a sense of agency and fellowship. And it makes you understand that you're not in this fight by yourself. So I would really encourage people to just go to the website, taxpayer.com. You can sign the petition for free. It's totally fine. And sign up, and we have a lot of fun. We go to pub nights and stuff too. We have a lot of fun at the CTF.
Kris Sims, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.